Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me start with our next panel, next session, regarding cybersecurity challenges. So we are honored that the panel of cybersecurity challenges in the digital world is a part of 16th Bled Strategic Forum during Slovenian presidency of the Council of the EU. I would like to thank distinguished panelists for taking your time to be here with us. Some of the panelists are joining us digitally, so we have a hybrid version of the session. Cybersecurity has been high on the agenda of the trio presidency, so German, Portuguese, and Slovenian EU Council presidency, as well as the upcoming French presidency. And we have been working on many highly relevant topics, files. There is a lot of important work ahead of us, nationally and internationally. Growing digitalization is touching every corner of our lives. At the same time, we have seen a lot of malicious cyber activities significantly disrupt many sectors of essential services and critical infrastructures in 2021. Online threats are becoming more complex. They are growing in scope, frequency, sophistication, and damage, even in the physical world. Today, state and non-state actors have advanced cyber offensive capabilities and are persistent in their efforts. Not only that, cyberspace has also clearly emerged as an area of global strategic competition. Today, we are constantly faced with attempts to abuse and control new technologies, and with threats to the internet as we know it, global, open, free, and secure. As a result of discussions on cybersecurity and digitalization are morphing into broader reflections on Europe's ability to remain a formidable actor in a world increasingly torn apart by geopolitical tensions. So today we will try to address a few core questions. What is Europe's path in this space? What could Europe's approach towards strategic autonomy be? What is the right balance between intensiveness, international collaboration, and independence and sovereignty? What does successful partnership, especially on the international level, look like? In particular, how we can create meaningful and multi-stakeholder partnership in this space so that we can collectively benefit from the resources, experience, and expertise from all relevant actors. What does success for Europe look like in this space in short, medium, and long term? Helping us navigate this complex environment, we have an estimated panel of experts that have been navigating the cutting edge of these issues in the past few years, and will be able to share the experience of their countries and companies and help us draw lessons on what worked well and what did not. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our first speaker, our first guest. To being with us, I want to introduce Ms. Eva-Maria Liimets, the Estonian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who I am particularly delighted to welcome back, as she has most recently served as the ambassador to the Czech Republic, Slovenia, and Croatia, and brings with her a wealth of experience in Estonian public service. So my first question for Minister is in this sense. Estonia was one of the first countries that has experienced how other states can use technology as an important tool and of course, for its foreign policy. So, am I sure that one event only marked as the start of the protective operation? So, my question is, how can you let's say, how you respond and how you describe this path to this year? When you put cybersecurity on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council. Please, Ambassador, for your remarks and answers. And just one remark for all of you. So you just push the button when you start to speak, and then when you finish, just once again, put the same button. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share Estonia's experience in cybersecurity area. On 29th of June this year, United Nations Security Council and Estonia hosted at the United Nations Security Council the first ever formal debate on cybersecurity. And we are really very glad that we managed to achieve this, and the debate was really very well attended by about 60 countries. But the path to this event for Estonia started already 2007, when Estonia faced the first ever cybersecurity attacks, which were against Estonia's critical infrastructure. And they were organized together with political pressure due to the fact that Estonia was removing one of the soldier statue from the center of the city to the cemetery. So it was a time when Estonia got different political pressure together with cyber attacks. So today, when we look back, so we had different hybrid activities against our government, and cyber was one part of it. After that, we explained the situation in different organizations, and it was kind of eye-opening for many countries around the world, especially, of course, in the EU, in NATO, also at the United Nations and Council of Europe. At that time, I was serving as a young diplomat in Washington, and I do remember very well how difficult it was to explain what exactly happened, because we didn't have good enough vocabulary, and it was everything, the internet, the use of internet was very different at that time in 2007. But step by step, we managed to provide evidences what happened in Estonia and how it happened. And we started to work with different organizations, first with Council of Europe, because already at that time there was a Bucharest Convention on cybercrime, which turned out to be very useful on this. Then, of course, also United Nations First Committee started to elaborate this, and then also in NATO. After that, also a NATO Center of Excellence was established in Estonia. So the start towards this council meeting in June this year started already 14 years ago for us. However, despite of these efforts on global cybersecurity community, we still face, of course, different cyber attacks and ransomware attacks, which are very problematic for societies. Recently also we saw, for example, in the US, where the attacks were against the oil companies and affected the life of the civil society. So based on these experiences, we believe that we have to continue to work together to raise awareness at the international community and work against these threats. And we shall work together with, of course, with the private sector, because some of the attacks are organized by criminals, others by the state support. So these coordinated activities are of importance, and this United Nations Security Council debate really showed us that this understanding and awareness how to cope with these attacks is globally rising. One of the principles which I also would like to emphasize is, of course, that we so we are working to protect the internet. We are working with the measures on cybersecurity, but at the same time, of course, we have to keep internet open. We shall keep this multi-stakeholder approach, and of course, also protect and promote human rights and fundamental freedoms at the same time while working on cybersecurity issues. And I'm really glad that Estonia was one of the founders or co-founders of the Internet Freedom Coalition, and is still also among the first countries in terms of internet freedom, together with Iceland. So I think that it shows that it's possible to grant a secure internet, protect internet, and at the same time stick to the principles of fundamental freedoms. So I would stop here and glad to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introductory remarks. Just please switch on. Thank you. I'm sure that we will, of course, follow this introduction remarks with some additional questions and debate after that. So once again, thank you, Minister, for your presentation. The second speaker is Mr. Yigal Unna, Director General, Israeli National Cyber Directorate. So Yigal Unna was one of the non-European voice on this panel. You bring with you over 20 years of experience at the cutting edge of cybersecurity, intelligence, cyber warfare. So your experience is really great. Israel has also famously built an impressive cybersecurity industry over the past decade. And while we have some great companies here in Europe and small clusters of success, what has driven your success? So what was the role of the government in that, and has it helped you become more autonomous in cyberspace? So Mr. Unna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Svete. Thank you, everybody. I wish I've been there with you in beautiful Bled and beautiful Slovenia, but unfortunately circumstances are still making more difficulties, more challenging to get over there. But thank you for having us. As you mentioned, the non-European member, but very close and very feeling closely to the subject, to the issue, and of course to the rest of you like-minded countries and cybersecurity experts and stuff that we all work and mitigate together. So it's obvious, as the predecessor, the minister from Estonia mentioned, the threat is common. Each and every one of us, none is above that, none has any waiver from that. All the countries, public sectors, private sectors, we all suffer from the same challenges, more or less, with the different flavors. But basically, and it just gets getting worse since the COVID-19 outbreak, and it's going to get even worse. The attackers, the bad guys, have the upper hand by definition. They have the surprise element, they have the initiative, they can and they do abuse vulnerabilities and exploits that are there, and they are usually faster than the good guys in finding them and infiltrating through them before we can manage to close them and to patch it. So we need a different paradigm, and I think that you mentioned Israel, but we are part of the community, and the EU is a great example of how community should and can do much better synergy than a few countries by themselves or even with the small groups. The greater picture that a community gives to each and every one of its members is the basic notion and secret to success in cybersecurity. In Israel, because we are pretty much alone still in our tough neighborhood, we had to build this kind of ecosystem of community within all our systems, government, public, private, military, civilian, all must work together because none can do that by themselves. So working by community and group effort, once we have the mindset to deal and to do and to work in a community, then it's just a matter of technicalities, how to manage that. And the secret of Israel is the closeness, the cohesive of these circles that understand that if we won't work together, then we'll die alone. And that's something that we need to do. How to do that? Well, I'm sure that me and our colleagues have the chance to elaborate, but basically how to harness innovation to group effort, to relative advantages that each and every party, whether it's a country, whether it's a company, can get to the greater good. And the secret is how to just to do it faster than the bad guys that have the upper hand, as I mentioned. Thanks.
Yigal, thank you so much for this very encouraging presentation, especially regarding cooperation and enhancing our capabilities at the international level, not just at national. Thank you very much once again. Turning now to another entity that has seen as a fair share of state-based sponsored attacks, but as a private sector entity. So we are talking a lot about different stakeholders, and we never should forget on the business, on the private initiative. So Microsoft operates across borders, and it offers its products and services to governments and companies all over the world. So as such, you must be an appealing target for sure. With us today is Mr. Casper Klynge. You joined Microsoft in 2020 as the Vice President of European Affairs, and before you were Denmark's and the world's first tech ambassador to the technological industry. So this is the fact which I have to emphasize. As such, you dealt with these issues from both sides, from the governmental, now from the private, from the Microsoft perspective. So my question would be, what is Microsoft doing to improve the stability and security of online environment? So we know that a lot of services probably will not operate even not anymore on the on-prem, but we have today more or less all going towards cloud services, etc. So, but also how to do the two words, so governmental and private sector, how to compare these sectors in sense of cybersec and cyber challenges. And of course, what can they learn from each other? This is something what is interesting for us as well. Mr. Klynge, the floor is yours.
No, thanks very much. And I have 45 minutes, 55 minutes to answer this question, or? No worries. No, it's great to be here. And it is true that I went from the light side to the dark side, or from the dark side to the light side. I'm not sure what direction it is, but having had the experience of working in the government before and now joining one of the companies, so to fast forward to the conclusion, I think cybersecurity, or indeed the foreign policy of technology, is an area where we need a closer collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. But I actually wanted to begin in a different place, because I'm getting so old that birthdays are not something you really want to remember. It's something you want to forget, as the number of gray hairs on my head shows. But there is one birthday that I remember very clearly, and that was in June 2017. I was still working for the Danish government. I was our bilateral ambassador to Indonesia, and this is when WannaCry and NotPetya hit globally. And there was one Danish company, a shipping company, that was particularly hard hit by this attack, and it basically wiped out their infrastructure in a matter of hours. And the reason I remember this very clearly is that we were trying to help this company because every day a fairly big container ship arrived in the harbor of Jakarta, and they had no idea what was in each of the containers because of the critical infrastructure being wiped out. So we were trying to get permits from the Indonesian authorities to unload these containers in the harbor of Jakarta. And it was, I think, a wake-up call for a small country like Denmark of how critical cybersecurity is, as the foreign minister also mentioned in her introduction. No casualties in terms of human lives were endangered. It was, quote unquote, only a question of a financial impact from a global company involved in trade. But I think if we fast forward till 2021 and where we are today, still unfortunately not completely out of a global pandemic, as other speakers have said, and as I'm sure Nathalie and others will come onto later on, we've had to move into hybrid working methodology. A lot of us have not been in the office for a long time. That doesn't apply to a lot of the actors involved in the business of cyber attacks, whether they are criminal networks or state-supported actors in this area. And of course, being a company like Microsoft that are involved in providing critical infrastructure, productivity tools, we have a pretty good picture of where this trend is moving, and I don't think I'm revealing any secrets by saying that trajectory, I think, is deeply concerning, because we have in fact seen a spike in the number of cyber attacks, but perhaps even more worrying, we've seen a spike in the sophistication of these attacks, and what is perhaps even worse than that, when you look back over a COVID-19 year, we have seen the cyber attackers without any moral hesitations whatsoever on attacking first-line operators in healthcare. We've seen them attack hospitals. We've seen them attack critical infrastructure across the world, but not least here in Europe as well. So I think the bottom line is that hopefully we don't need incidents like WannaCry and NotPetya to sort of remind us how important it is that we put all our efforts into addressing the threat from cybersecurity. It's high noon, and it's fantastic and a privilege for me to sit in a panel like this, but I think we need a sense of urgency that it's all hands on deck. That applies on the government side. It certainly also applies on the private sector side. We're trying in Microsoft to be supportive of the work and responsibility of governments, and I want to emphasize this is not an area where we believe that we have the primary responsibility. It has to be done in partnership with government and international organizations. But of course, we're also trying to provide, through our technical measures, the best possible way of mitigating the attacks that we're seeing from around the world. I want to congratulate Estonia also for the important role that you played on the UN Security Council for putting this more firmly on the agenda. But I think it's also worth just mentioning that we've seen some progress at the United Nations track, both with the Open-Ended Working Group and also with the GGE report. Important progress. We would have liked to see a little bit more focus on the ability to involve the private sector through multi-stakeholderism, and perhaps even doubling down on the applicability of international law in cyberspace, but it is still a very important step that we've seen coming out of the UN. But there are other formats, and sitting here in Europe and being a European, I just also want to sort of acknowledge what we're seeing happening inside the European Union, both on the regulatory front, but in fact also in pushing forward the norms discussions, defining the traffic rules around cyber attacks. Are we where we need to be? I don't think we are. We will continue to play our part in collaboration with EU member states, with actors, playing hopefully a supportive role also in terms of the Paris call and the Paris Peace Forum, and of course also making sure that we on a daily basis upgrade our security to the maximum extent. I think there were others in the beginning saying this is unfortunately a little bit of an arms race where technology is both an opportunity to address cyber attacks. It is unfortunately also a weapon in the hands of the ones that want to hurt the societies that we're in. I'll finish here to begin with by just saying it's great to be here, and I think it's fantastic that also the Bled Strategic Forum is putting cybersecurity on the agenda the way that you are. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your thoughts as well. So our next speaker is digital as well. So Ms. Michelle Markoff, Acting Coordinator for Cyber Issues, United States Department of State. Ms. Markoff, you have been overseeing the development and implementation of foreign policy initiatives on cyberspace issues since 1998, so more than 20 years. You have helped coordinating United States policy on the spectrum of cyber-related policy issues and developing diplomatic strategies to encourage states to join the United States in taking steps to protect their critical networks and infrastructures and to cooperate internationally to enhance and preserve global cyber stability. What role does, in your opinion, transatlantic cyber diplomacy play in overcoming European foreign and security challenges?
Well, good morning, everybody. And I want to thank the Republic of Slovenia and you, Uroš, for inviting me to join this important conversation. I want to say hello to many of my friends there who I have not seen in person in quite a while and would have loved to have been in Bled, which looks extremely beautiful in all the pictures. So, but as my longtime colleagues know, our partnership with Europe on cyber issues is critical to all of us, especially critical to defending an open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet for all. When it comes to cyber diplomacy, we and our transatlantic allies and partners have led the effort to establish what's come to be known as the Framework of Responsible State Behavior, which is a standard of conduct for states in cyberspace that actually grew out of our observation of what happened to Estonia in 2007. And the transatlantic relationship is central to an incredibly broad range of cyber and technology policy issues and activities. The US strongly advocates for enhanced and modernized cybersecurity of the NATO enterprise and of our allies through the NATO alliance. Also, at the US-EU summit last June, we resolved to deepen cooperation on cybersecurity information sharing and to support democracy by fostering responsible behavior in cyberspace. Further, we have an ongoing US-EU cyber dialogue, which is really emblematic of the strength of our diplomatic relationship. And we plan to hold our next meeting virtually later this month. So our cooperation is truly fundamental to meeting the challenges of these increasingly sophisticated cyber incidents that threaten our security and well-being. It's my view that we cannot fight our way out of these security issues. Diplomacy is central. This year, we've worked closely in coordination to call out disruptive and destabilizing state-sponsored malicious cyber activity. We have welcomed EU and NATO's expression of solidarity regarding Russia's hack of SolarWinds and China's compromise of the Microsoft Exchange server platform, which targeted US and European government agencies and business, among others. We really need to continue to stand together and work together to strengthen the norms that provide an unassailable standard of conduct for state behavior in cyberspace. As has already been mentioned, last May, the UN group of governmental experts on cyber reached consensus on an important report that will do much, I believe, to increase understanding and facilitate implementation around the world of the norms and other elements of this framework of responsible state behavior that we have spent over a decade constructing. And then earlier this year, the open-ended working group in the UN gave 193 UN member states an opportunity and a venue to study the framework for over 2 years and then to express their consensus support for the framework. But has been pointed out by many, norms are not the framework provides an important standard of conduct. We know that not all actors in cyberspace observe the niceties of international law or standard of conduct. And we've come to the conclusion that we must stand together to impose consequences on bad behavior in cyberspace. We were very happy to see the EU's cybersecurity strategy, which was released late last year. It recognizes the need to prevent, deter, and respond to malicious cyber incidents. And we welcome the EU's cyber toolkit and its sanctions authority in first 2 sets of cyber sanctions. I would underscore that the US has recently prepared its own cyber deterrence playbook, which outlines the potential responses we can choose in case of malicious cyber activity that demands a response. This is all below the threshold of the use of force. Actions like these can provide a strong foundation for US-EU cyber cooperation and demonstrate how we can work together to build trust, enhance transparency, and decrease the risk of conflict in cyberspace. Why don't I stop there?
Thank you very much, Ms. Markoff, for your, I would say, very brief information sharing with us and your aspects. And we will continue with international aspects of cybersec or information technology as well. So next speaker will be Ambassador Nathalie Jaarsma, Ambassador at Large for Security Policy and Cyber, Kingdom of Netherlands. So before that, you served as the ambassador to Cyprus and headed the Security and Defense Policy Division at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. From 2008 to 2012, you were a political counselor at the Dutch Embassy in Washington, D.C. So the debate is touching upon sovereignty, technological dependence, and emerging conflicts online, highlighting both challenges and potential solutions. So can you elaborate on this and particularly on the foreign policy implication of cybersecurity?
Yeah, thank you, Uroš, for the question. And first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here, and to you and to the Strategic Forum and the government of Slovenia, and for hosting us in such a beautiful place. Really fantastic. It's great to see so many colleagues here really in person. So I'm very excited to be here, sort of extra excited to be on this panel. We were just chatting before we started. It feels a bit like a reunion. And so thank you for providing this opportunity. And Michelle, we will have that opportunity with you as well. As previous speakers described, for long we considered the internet as being a space that only provides good things for us, or mainly. But we have all had our wake-up call, as was described previously. I mean, the Estonian example, WannaCry, we also had our own wake-up call with the Rinotar in the Netherlands. So our perspectives have changed. And as states are using the cyber environment for foreign policy goals, it is crucial that we have indeed this framework for responsible state behavior in cyber, as Michelle described clearly. With the recent consensus in the UN, we think that the framework is very solid, and we have a clear yardstick to measure good and bad behavior. Obviously, one of our strategic goals is that states follow the international agreed rules. And so all states have the responsibility to implement them, but we also need to continue dialogue about interpretation and about our expectations and raise the costs for bad behavior. The kind of behavior, obviously, that is not in line with the agreed rules. And the EU already has the means to do so. Already in 2016, the Netherlands was at the cradle of the EU cyber diplomacy toolbox, and a box, so to speak, that has tools to diplomatically respond to malicious cyber activities on an EU level. The toolbox was subsequently adopted in June 2017, and the cyber sanction regime was added in May 2019. And by now we have 8 persons and 4 entities that were identified as responsible for being involved in significant malicious cyber attacks, and they were put on the sanctions list. By adopting these tools and measures, the EU has taken a step towards a more secure cyber domain, and the toolbox sends out a strong message. It is really a strong signal, I think, when in today's world a union of 27 countries imposes these measures, but it's even stronger when you do that with a broader coalition. Malicious hackers must know that they can suffer personal consequences for their behavior. And we ought to keep raising the price on malicious behavior in cyberspace so that fewer hackers will raise their hands for such malicious tasks. Our common goal stays very clear: to stop and deter malicious cyber behavior. Coordination and information sharing with like-minded countries is key, and interagency coordination is key. And perhaps we should seek greater cooperation, as was also indicated, with the private sector, with the tech and the cybersecurity community. Unfortunately, as Casper clearly described, there is a spike in threats. Cyber threats are becoming more complex, growing in scope, frequency and sophistication. And we see that both state and non-state actors and state-sponsored actors are involved. They possess advanced cyber offensive capabilities and are very persistent in their efforts. And not only that, cyberspace has clearly also emerged as an area of global strategic competition. And it is no surprise that malicious cyber activities still pose a substantial threat to EU's to the EU's security interests. Therefore, I and the Netherlands believe that the EU should consider expanding the cyber diplomacy toolbox with measures on both ends of the spectrum, by both building on pressure and dialogue. We should definitely reach out to states where hackers operate from and thrive. Continued dialogues on cyber and what we expect with, for example, China and Russia is key. Also, when measures are necessary, the EU as a whole should reach out to states before and after specific measures are taken. Dialogue remains just as important as pressure. The cyber sanction regime, the current one, only offers the possibility to list persons and entities after it has made very plausible that they are responsible for or have participated in malicious cyber operations with significant consequences. Currently, the restrictive measures that can be imposed consist of an entry ban and the freezing of assets. But the question is whether that is sufficient to actually create the behavioral change that we're looking for. The behavioral change in line with the agreed international rules and norms. And we believe we should build on the pressure side and strive for a toolbox which includes the option to impose heavier restrictive measures on a state actor responsible for cyber attacks that pose a substantial and significant threat to the EU. However, that does, of course, assume the political will for public and political attribution at 27. Finally, I want to say a few words about EU sovereignty in the digital age, because you also touched upon that. And I wanted to flag to you the very important meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs in July, and I think you were a part of it, where the ministers in the Foreign Affairs Council expressed their wish that the digital policy, internal and external, should be more aligned, so that an external policy actually complements the internal policy, and we seek a more coherent policy. And that is, we believe that is key to keep Europe secure, to have sustainable and inclusive growth, and to preserve our values and way of life, and to ensure the peace and international stability, while at the same time keeping our promise of having open economies and open markets. How do we do that? There was a non-paper that was supported by all member states, and that clearly describes 5 or 4 different tracks, and we're really looking forward to develop that agenda together with all the EU member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jaarsma. Last but not least, in the first round of today's speakers is Ambassador Tadeusz Chomicki, Ambassador for Cyber and Tech Affairs, Security Policy Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Poland. You held several senior positions there, including Director General of Asia and Pacific Department, Export Policy Department, and Deputy Director General of Security Policy Department. You also served as the Polish ambassador to China and Mongolia, as well as to the Republic of Korea. You have throughout your career dealt with issues as diverse as traditional foreign policy, but also export controls, including as they apply to cyberspace and complex challenges such as 5G network. These issues are increasingly at the core of success, and not just the country's foreign policy, but national security and domestic economy as well. So please, Ambassador, tell us more about Polish approach in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. Indeed, as all the previous speakers, I really am praising this precious moments of meeting each other in face-to-face on site, not through the monitors. For many of us, we see each other for the first time. Although we worked for a long time, for almost 2 years online, almost daily. So missing Michelle here, of course, we are hoping to reconvene in a larger group face-to-face. But I also wanted to praise Slovenia for organizing the forum in spite of the challenges we're facing from pandemic, and I think the place in the strategic forum, Bled Strategic Forum, to the digital challenges is a sign of the importance we all attach to this field of international national activities. So that is a proof. I think sometimes thinking about the challenges we're facing in the cyberspace is not making my hair gray anymore, for the reasons you could see possibly, like Casper has complained about getting his hair gray, just making you more handsome, but with myself I don't have much hair left to get them gray, but I tell you it is getting gray inside as we think about the complexity and the speed at which we are facing new challenges every day, in fact. And our answers to those challenges are sometimes not quick enough, because administrations, even companies, we have a certain way of working. And the international treaties and agreements, even longer time to work out. So it's a very complex situation. I was being asked by some of my superiors earlier this year, beginning of the year, what the cybersecurity is about, in fact, because we all trained now by people like you that it is important. This is on the agenda of all our bilateral talks. And as minister meets another ministers, they always says we need to cooperate in cybersecurity. But what does it really mean other than plugging cables into switches and what is the cybersecurity today? And this is the key question indeed. The cybersecurity is a backbone of the future development of economy, societies and states. I mean, we all know the increasing digitalization of the world around us is giving us a lot of opportunities, but is giving us a lot of challenges as well. And without securing the use of digital technologies, which are the condition of developing Industry 4 or Industry 4 or the new kind of economy, and then as a result, the new order of the economic and political world, as we may face it, the cybersecurity is the condition for that and how we can approach it. So each and every country today is aware of the importance of that, and we're trying to do our best. For Poland, it is no different. The key element for each national level activities is to understand the very specific nature of the cybersecurity, which is making it different from other kinds of security. This is the most transnational cybersecurity we're facing. We talk about kinetic power, tanks and everything. We're used to that. We can count it, we can calculate it, we have treaties for that. When we talk about cybersecurity, it doesn't know any borders. And it can hit you at any time, anywhere from a place you cannot identify. What does it mean? Both threats and responses to cyber in the cyber world must be treated as international, and transnational cooperation is a condition for that. And the same comes for the other aspect, other second feature of the cybersecurity is transsectorial. You cannot have security in one sector. You cannot provide security for your militaries, but not for your administration. You cannot provide security for your administration, but not for the private sector and economy and civil society. So that makes a completely new situation, and we have to deal with the situation in the way we didn't have to before. I remember all good days in 1990, mid-90s, when I was head of the delegation of Poland to work out Wassenaar arrangement, the export control regime. We were talking about machines, dual, of course, military components, the conventional arms, but also dual-use technologies. And our problem was how precise machine tools we need to control, or how speedy computers we need to control. That was the top of the complexity of the technological issues we were dealing with in the mid-90s. This is like a kindergarten now if you compare to what we are facing in the cyber world. So what I'm saying here is with whatever we do in Poland and every other country is doing is interlinked with what we do in our wider context. So for Poland, we try to be active in the international efforts, be it United Nations, OSCE, NATO, European Union, some regional initiatives of bilateral cooperation. For the obvious reasons, the most important context, regulatory context for what we do inside Poland is the European Union, which in the last years have developed a number of policies, regulations, and toolboxes, etc., and is continuously developing them. Sometimes it's difficult to follow, sometimes it's difficult to translate into national system. That includes 5G security toolbox. Then we start the reviews. We're trying to apply new instruments, new organizational structures in the EU to deal with this complexity. But come back to more focused answer to your question, what we do in Poland. Taking EU regulation. Right, it's sort of back. I will bend more then. Cyber attack as we speak, I would say, maybe. We have two lights on, not one, and it doesn't make it twice as loud. It makes it twice as quiet as before, but we'll try to handle it. So there are different ways to describe what we're doing, but I will start with and finish with the formal one. We have had, of course, the national strategy for the cybersecurity in Poland, the Poland cybersecurity strategy. The one which we adopted in 2017 was meant for the next 5 years until 2022. But of course, the changing situation, the word forced it to change also. So the current one is adopted at the end of 2019 because we had to adopt it, to change it, to adapt to the changing realities and the threats. So this is the key document which describes what are the major targets and goals of the cybersecurity system in Poland. And it's also a part of the wider national security strategy of 2020. The strategy has also an action plan, which is describing what the governments need to do in specific fields, what is the timeline, and what are the instruments to measure the implementation of these actions under the strategy. The main goal is that it defines the goals and it defines the regulatory measures that must be implemented to increase the level of protection against the cyber threats and the level of information protection in public, in military, and in private sectors. There are specific 5 goals that the strategy is naming. One is the improvement of the national security system, that is the revision of the existing regulatory measures, the laws and the implementing regulations. We have the National Cybersecurity System Law, which is describing all the legal basis for the cybersecurity system. That needs to be continuously reviewed. We are in the process of adopting changes to the law, which are responding to the challenges we're facing. For example, introducing the definition of the verified suppliers in the telecommunication, which will be applied to all the procurement and the cooperation that we have with the companies from all over the world to provide the infrastructure and the software for the telecommunication systems. That's just an example. But it also develops the CERT systems. We have 3 now CERTs, on the national level, the military, the public administration, and the public. The fourth one created, which is also a response to the challenges, is covering the finances of Poland. So we have a national level finance CESIR, but we also encourage the sectorial CESIRs to be built by the communities. The second goal is to increase the resilience of public administration and the private sector information systems. And one of the instruments, or some of the instruments that we apply, is the national cybersecurity standards. All the instruments and measures and solutions will be assessed and certified to become adopted by approved by the national cybersecurity standards. The third one is to increase the national potential in the field of cybersecurity technology and the development of effective public-private partnership. We have created several instruments under this goal. We have Cyber Made in Poland cluster, for example. We have several clusters bringing the Polish companies and also international companies operating in Poland to work together to improve the national capabilities in the ITCs. And fourth one is to increase the social awareness and social competence in the field of cybersecurity mostly through the dedicated educational programs and awareness campaigns. I think this is a very important one. This is long-term, very, very important one. Some leading countries in Europe, especially in the Northern Europe, including Estonia, Finland, has done this lesson well before, and we want to catch up because bringing up the new generations with the cyber education, but also to raise the social awareness of the cyber threats and the importance of that for the function of the society and the statehood is very important. By the way, we're going to make this, I'm a little bit ahead of time because formally we'll announce it in November, but this topic, social awareness, cyber awareness and cyber educations are going to be our lead topics for our upcoming chairmanship of the OSCE in 2022. Poland is going to chair the works of the OSCE, and in the cybersecurity dimension, the social awareness and education, cyber education will be our lead topics in the works of the OSCE. And finally, last but not least, is to increase or to build a stronger position of Poland in the field of cybersecurity globally. Because, as I said, this is at the beginning. It requires the joint efforts. We cannot increase our security in Poland doing it by ourselves. For ourselves, we have to work, and the active international cooperation is on the strategic level, on the political level, on the technological level, and operational level are conditions of increasing the security of each and every nation participating in this exercise. And again, the EU and NATO are our natural environment, so we focus our efforts there, but we also do not forget that the United Nations is setting the global standards, and we try to be active in this work. And taking this opportunity, I wanted to thank Madam Minister and my friend Heli, the cyber ambassador who's sitting here listening to us, for bringing this to the attention of the Security Council of the United Nations, and not just working groups as we do it for years, but the Security Council for the first time, due to your efforts, took space and time to discuss.
Thank you, Ambassador Chomicki, for presenting the Polish approach to the cybersecurity. We touched today very, I would say, specific and different national approaches, although we are all using the global service or the global cyberspace and the global cyber or information technology. And of course, we touched as well the international aspects. But let us maybe be more focused to the European level as well. So maybe for the next round of the questions, Minister Liimets, what could Europe's approach towards strategic autonomy be? What should be the main areas that we seek to address in sense of not to, let's say, limit the kind of free market and free exchange of the technologies, but still have to be able to autonomously decide whether and what kind of technology we are going to use in the future. Please.
Thank you for this opportunity to discuss this topic also at European level. So it depends from this perspective we are looking to this cybersecurity question. I think that it's important to look at it from the perspective of criminals first. We must make these efforts of criminals more difficult for them. First, of course, by securing our infrastructure, which was also broadly explained here, And the second, also we should find how to punish the criminals. Why I'm saying that, because it was also mentioned here already that the EU has the sanctions regime for punishing organizers of cyber attacks, and it's used by today, it's used twice. And first it was related to WannaCry attacks, and the second time it was used against the hackers who attacked the Bundestag in Germany. So I think it's very important to agree jointly on the measures, what we do with the criminals who impose these cyber attacks against companies or governmental infrastructure. And of course, when we talk about the international law, then the Budapest Convention was the convention which is approved to be useful, and it's really good that we have countries around the globe who have joined this effort. And as you mentioned, the internet is global, so therefore it's not enough to do something regionally. It's always important to ally together with other liberal democracies around the globe to achieve what we want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next question, we are going back to the Israel. So, Yigal, since we are discussing European foreign and security challenges in the digital world, what's, in your opinion, the right balance between inclusiveness, international cooperation, sovereignty, or independence? So you already exposed some of the ideas today, but please, maybe if you can further elaborate your contribution. So what does successful partnership, especially on the international level, look like according to your opinion?
Thank you. Yes, we have little more experience in building and succeeding in building the right coalition and the right balance. First, I think the basics of every good partnership here is info sharing, information sharing, and in fact, personally, after 30 years, by the way, of experience, way before it was called cyber, the number one remedy to fight the bad guys in cybersecurity is by a quick, speed light, transparent, efficient info sharing. We in Israel, as in many other countries, some of them are here in the panel, we have a MISP, we have an internal domestic information sharing between private and public sector. In Israel, we run it, we call it CyberNet, and it's so successful that the companies, the private entities, and some of the public, the government also, more than 2,000 members, trusted members, asked for an API, asked for a way that we can not just send the information, but also the raw material, the API mode that we can close the gaps and do it directly without the need to copy and paste and mistype and all these kind of things. It's so successful so that our Prime Minister directed us to elevate it into international, into global level. And we are now in the midst of turning it into a global cybernet shield after his direct order. And I take this opportunity with the EU and of course with you, with Slovenia, that we just signed last week, an MOU as a symbol of getting a new step in partnership. We urge you to join in and come into this kind of global first-time MISP that we can do an actual info sharing and be faster than the bad guys. But info sharing is a big thing, but not the only thing. Technologies. Well, in Israel, we have more than 600 companies. We have more than 41% of the global investment in cybersecurity comes to Israel, second only to the US. And there's a lot of new startups every day. Not all of them are relevant, but the natural cycle is doing its course, and we see more and more drops by the sideways, but the good ones keep on and becoming unicorns. We have 7 unicorns just in the first half of this year, all symbols of innovation and things that Israel is more than happy to contribute to this kind of a partnership, to an overall struggle, combat against the hackers. The third is the vulnerabilities detection and prevention and closing the exploits. This is something that Israel, the INCD, the National Cyber Directorate, is now a CNA. It's a CVE numbering authority. In Israel, we have 2 other companies, Checkpoint and CyberArk, that also. In the world, we have 180 CNAs overall. And we are offering our services. I hope that you can still hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Our services, okay. So our services to everyone, first to disclose new CVEs, new exploits, new vulnerabilities. As second, how we can build an international network of VDPs, of vulnerability disclosure program between like-minded countries, so we can again take it one or few steps up. Another thing is, and some of my colleagues mentioned that we need to put a lot of boost and efforts in elevation of how we cooperate in regulation, standardization, and of course with public policy. Each and every country has its own framework, own system. The EU has, of course, a larger framework, and we need to make sure that they're all aligned and no holes and no gaps between us, that the bad guys can take advantage and abuse that. And last but not least, well, deterrence, sanctions, all kinds of practical, tangible measures that can be taken by countries, by governments, by EU and other international caucuses. We think we need to hold hands and make sure that it's more effective. Norms, well, it's an important thing, but tangible measures and actionable remedies that each and every country and sectors can take to make sure that the bad guys pay a price, and a dear price, to any attempt, not just success, any attempt. And that's including also the cryptocurrencies and all the life cycle of the hackers, ransomware, and bad guys, whenever they can hide. For example, just think of the Know Your Client to counter drug laundering and other criminal money laundering. If we can adopt it and adjust it to know your client when they come to hire and rent services like servers, like hosting in Netherlands, in Poland, in every European country. If you just ask few more questions and make little more inquiries, who are the clients, who are paying for that, who's behind those, then we'll minimize it by some level. I think even with a big portion, and we need to and it cannot be bilateral. It should be multilateral, international, all European effort to raise a new level of security, of cooperation, to hold back and to push back. So it's private sector for sure, abiding regulations, abiding standardization by the public sector, and us joining hands and making sure that no obstacles and no challenges are in our way to make sure that it happens. That's the basics.
Yigal, thank you very much for sharing with us very concrete operative ideas how to really enhance our cooperation, not just the policy or political level, but the operative incident handling as well. So it's really, I really appreciate this information you shared with us today. Maybe if we are going a little bit further to Casper, once again to you. So according to your experience from the government and now from the business side, my question is, what are the policies Europe should be pursuing internationally? So now we are discussing very different aspects of cybersecurity, but what should we really pursuing at the international level?
Listen, that's a very dangerous question for me to answer, sitting next to an Estonian foreign minister and a Dutch ambassador, what the EU should be doing. But I mean, joking aside, I actually think the EU has taken some pretty important steps in the last couple of years. We have the new EU cybersecurity strategy. I think that's an important step forward. Also want to mention the NIST directive that actually puts additional efforts on sort of the technical requirements in mitigating the threats from cybersecurity attacks. Well, one thing, and I wanted to tie to something Nathalie said before around digital sovereignty, because when we look at the cybersecurity domain, what is the problem with cyber attacks? I think it's twofold. I mean, one aspect is that it attacks our critical infrastructure, it damages our economy, it puts people at risk. But I think the other casualty around cyber attacks is that it takes away trust in technology. And I think when we look at the world through the prism of sort of geopolitical competition around technology, you know, that is actually an area where Europe is unfortunately trading a little bit behind compared to the US and Asia, where Europe needs to invest a lot more. And my understanding of the digital sovereignty discussion is that it's very much about Europe becoming more in control, having sort of the destiny of Europe in its own hands. And adaptation of new technology is a critical aspect of that. You know, Michelle, who I've lost on the monitor here, but assume she's still with us, mentioned early on, you know, some of the attacks we saw a couple of months ago, including Hafnium. One of the reasons why that attack was as efficient as it was because that happened on on-premise servers. It didn't take place against our cloud operations, where we would have had a much better opportunity of protecting our customers. And if one of the casualties around the cybersecurity, you know, threat scenario is that people lose a bit of confidence in adapting new technologies, including adapting cloud technology, that actually has an impact, in my view, on Europe's ability to become even more digital sovereign. Because if you want me to be a little bit polemic, how can you have digital sovereignty if you don't have cybersecurity? I think it's very difficult to look at digital sovereignty without you know, fundamental security. So I think it's one of these areas that we need to invest more in. And then you know, another point that Michelle made earlier that I very much agree with, not only because I represent Microsoft, but I think transatlantic collaboration in this area is absolutely essential. It is fundamentally about defending our values, our democratic societies against those that want to attack it. And I think we really need to make sure that we use the momentum coming out of the EU-US summit for, you know, fostering a lot more collaboration across the pond in this area. I know we're running out of time, so I will stop here to allow others to say a couple of words as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Casper, for this answer. Michelle, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. So maybe if I may, if you go a little bit further where Casper already finished. So what actually what lessons can Europe learn from the US, and especially when we are talking about private-public partnerships? So should we give some greater role to the private sector? So what's your attitude to this?
Well, far be it for me to suggest that Europe can learn from the United States. I think that part of our collaboration is that we're learning together, that there are mutually reinforcing strategies. And I think Yigal had put his finger on the issue of beating down barriers to information sharing, which are often there because of class or other types of things. So, I think that we are building in terms of our collaboration on standing up and attributing bad behavior to malign actors. We're really building processes and muscle memory, which allow us to be much more timely and agile in our responses. So, as Casper said, we and our partners in Europe need to do two things. We need to remain the innovative leaders and standard setters, both for the technology, but also to ensure that universal rights and democratic values remain at the center of the innovation that's to come. And that it delivers real benefits to people's lives. That's the test, as Secretary Blinken said recently, that we have to pass, and democracies have to pass that test together. And so the bottom line is we're much stronger together. And we have to collaborate in advancing a positive shared vision of the internet. And that means, how public policy is made. And we have to counter the views and proclivities of authoritarian states. So, we want to deter, as I said earlier, networks that try to disrupt us with impunity. And we need to continue to build what has become a very big tent of like-minded nations, a coalition that is allowing us to stand up and respond together and to impose consequences. Because when we stand together, we're not subject to the normal tit-for-tat escalation problems that we do when the US simply accuses Russia or China of something. By standing together, we are a powerful force, and I hope that we can convince our adversaries to adjust their decision-making and cause them to question whether the reward of their actions is worth the risk. And on that score, we have to really come up with clever, out-of-the-box consequences that really cause that cost-benefit calculation to be much more finely tuned. In terms of the role of the private sector, we've always supported multi-stakeholderism. We believe that everybody who has an equity in information technology should have a voice, particularly, the private sector operators and owners of the system and the designers and implementers of the software. The question is how that voice needs to be expressed. And I think that there's been differing opinions about that. I note the recent extraordinary contributions that the private sector has made, particularly on the incident management and identification side, when it's FireEye and others who identified SolarWinds and others identifying Microsoft Exchange issues. I think that role in collaboration and breaking down barriers to that sort of information sharing between the private sector and the government is extremely important. But generally speaking, I think that the private sector should not only have a voice, it needs to understand that it has responsibilities to the public that it serves. And I know that this administration, the Biden administration, has clearly tried to incentivize the private industry to do things like prioritize cybersecurity. Just last week, President Biden met with private sector leaders from energy, water, insurance, finance, technology, and education sectors, including the CEO of Microsoft, to discuss a whole of nation effort to address cybersecurity threats. In March, the White House convened a coordination group to respond to the compromise of Microsoft Exchange Server platform. It was the first such group to include private sector members who were invited based on their specific insights into this incident. In May, President Biden issued an executive order that, among other things, directs the creation of minimum security standards for any software that the US government purchases. This spring, the Biden administration also launched a 100-day initiative to improve cybersecurity across the electric sector, with other critical infrastructure sectors to follow. And then finally, most recently in July, the president issued a national security memorandum establishing voluntary cybersecurity goals that clearly outline expectations for owners and operators of critical infrastructure. And so I believe that these types of responsibilities fall on the private sector. And I think there are some important lessons here on how Europe could more effectively engage with their own businesses. And we would certainly welcome a dialogue on that issue. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Nathalie, if I may go to you now with a question which is very complex, but I hope that you will be able to answer briefly still. No doubt that ICT has been evolving in the last 40 years from very research-based technology to the global worldwide use, and definitely now is one of the most important, most delicate questions, dilemma between security, privacy, security, human rights. So what's your opinion in this case? Can Europe still ensure security and still keep the role as being an advocate for human rights worldwide?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And actually, it is part of my portfolio, because from the very first beginning, when we established our cyber task force at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our human rights colleagues have been part of that, as well as our international lawyers and our economic colleagues and security folks, obviously. I think, to answer your question, I think Michelle made a very important point, and that is innovation. I think innovation is key to be indeed the standard setter in the world, and to be able to set standards that are in line with your values. And obviously the EU is a community based on shared values, and values that are similar in other liberal democracies. So we need to work together as liberal democracies. But the standard setting based on a human-centric approach is key. The other thing, when you look at our values, is that, of course, the EU has developed itself into a direction of being very good at sort of being a regulatory body, and has always been, but also in the cyber domain. So, of course, case in point here is the GDPR. And the GDPR seeks to protect the privacy of citizens, so one of the fundamental human rights. And of course, it has had influence on tech companies. And I'd like to pick up on a point that Casper made, and that is that cybersecurity is essential for trust of the public in digital products. But I think that actually having our shared values sort of in the products is essential for that trust as well. I mean, I don't want to be using products that are, for example, spying on me or using my personal data for something. So the GDPR, I think, also helped the private sector to actually have their products being accepted in Europe, in the long run at least. We see new legislation, of course, coming from Europe, and there's the Digital Services Act, the European Democracy Action Plan, and the EU cybersecurity strategy. And I think we're all, the EU is trying to find the right balance between privacy, values, security, and at the same time, there are a lot of programs to actually stimulate innovation. But indeed, I like to come back to that innovation. I think one cannot protect oneself without being sort of one of the front runners and setting the standards. Finally, of course, at the international stage, the EU is also aiming to increase its efforts in the debate on the implementation of the normative framework that was discussed earlier. The core of the framework is that international law applies in cyberspace, including human rights that applies in cyberspace. So we need to be working on how does that work in cyberspace and be sort of going just a spade deeper, as in what does that mean, human rights in cyberspace, and what does that mean for the technology that we develop and that we would like to see in Europe, and what don't we like? So thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. Last but not least again, so Tadeusz, please, maybe the final question for you in this round, your concrete ideas how Europe should cooperate with allies, with other partners globally, and maybe how should we build a very, I would say, concrete foundation of trust, what is probably the most important pillar for information sharing, knowledge, incident reports, what is, of course, at the end crucial for coping with cyber incidents.
Thank you. This is like what Casper said. Would you like 15 minutes or 1 hour, 50 minutes answer? We are probably over time now, about time. So it's a 3-minute version. Let's try to do it. I think it's a very important question. And I think COVID showed us a lot of things. Among others, it showed us that this is the end of the happy era of happy globalism. It's done, it's finished, for many reasons. And Europe has experienced a number of vulnerabilities related to our dependence on supply chains from a number of countries. Be it the medicine or the resources that we need for production, many things. So that is no surprise that it stimulated the very vivid internal European discussions about strategic autonomy. And there are very good reasons for these discussions, of course. But without going into details of the whole complexity of these discussions on this whole spectrum of what strategic autonomy can mean, I would refer to a few comments, restrain myself to a few comments on the cyberspace. I would say Poland supports the EU's ambitions to increase our digital autonomy, to mostly by what I understand here is to increase the Europeans' digital and cyber capabilities. Capabilities when it comes to research, to development, to innovation, but also to production, to operation, and to trading the technologies and solutions in the cyberspace. We believe it is right and it is justified for many reasons, including our security needs, our economic development, and also the Europe's global market share. And Europe has a lot of talents. Europe has a lot of good brains and good ideas. But all this is subject to fragmentation between 27 member states, even with so many years of EU developing instruments to support European goals, European instruments of support, we still suffer from the difficulties for the companies, for the research institutions to become global because we are fragmented. One of the answers that has been decided recently is the European Center for Cyberspace Competence that is going to be located in Bucharest, in Romania. Poland lost its race being one of the candidates, but it doesn't matter. We hope that this center will provide resources, financial resources, but also organizational resources to help European companies to develop the technologies for ICT, for cybersecurity, in order to take their place in the European market, but also global market. And that means that it will increase, also the center should help to increase the cooperation between companies which are big and small, and which are coming from more than 1, 2, or 3 countries. This is the only way for Europe to go. But can we achieve in foreseeable future autonomy in cyber or digital space in Europe? We cannot, because we are missing still the very basic technologies in Europe. And it's not going to happen very soon that we develop them. So if we cannot develop it, shall we give up developing it? No, we should not, for the purposes I mentioned, security, the business opportunities for the European companies, we should do it. Now the question is with whom then we should do it, or against we should not do it. Poland is of the, and myself, strong opinion that we need to maintain good transatlantic cooperation here with the US, but not only with the US, with our partners, which share the same systems of values, as mentioned a few times by the previous speakers, with those we share the same goals, because it's not only about us in Europe, it's not just about America, it's about the future of the world. There are still hundreds of countries outside of transatlantic alliance, and they are also subject to development of technologies which are necessary, digital, and where this technology come, with what standards, what they will change in the organization of the societies and the statehoods of these countries is also important. For many reasons, we should make sure that we continue to develop our capabilities within the autonomy, cyber autonomy of Europe, but in partnership with the trusted partners with whom we share the interest in security and larger interest in the same value systems. This is business. I mean, Casper is representing a big company, and I want this company to develop well because I'm a shareholder. And but you know, the companies like Microsoft and other giants, they need to also adopt what we think is right in Europe for Europeans. And I mean regulatory solutions, for example. So I think there is a big chance for Europe and the US and other partners to have successful cooperation and developing innovative technologies, digital technologies, if we understand each other's sensitivities and needs. And sometimes big companies need to earn less, maybe, in order to stay in the European market for the future of this market and themselves, but also to the common and shared good of the societies and states of this partnership. So I'm positive. We have managed to start important instrument, TTC, kicking off. We'll see what are the results of that process. It's hard to say now, but I'm positive because we made some internal analysis in Poland that especially in personal data protection, which is important for Europeans very much, but also in cybersecurity, in those two areas, I'm very positive or optimistic, relatively optimistic for the future of the TTC negotiations and talks. And Europe is the leading regulatory factor in the world, as was discussed also by Nathalie and other colleagues in the global dimension, UN, etc. It needs to be adopted and understood by the American partners as well. But I see there is a win-win solution for that. And I'm very positive that we should not cease from the efforts to achieve the way of cooperation between both sides of Atlantic that will provide us with the newest technology development, less interdependence on the, especially partners from outside, but also will provide a fair access to the companies from Europe to the global market, because they need to develop, otherwise I have no resources to pay my pension when I retire, so we need that for sure, and provide the security to all of us. So I'll stop here, not to be punished by the organizers for overstretching the time limits of our panel. Thank you.
Tadeusz, thank you so much for this final, very optimistic and encouraging statements from you. So unfortunately, we are already over the time, and I cannot give the floor to the audience, but I hope that you really enjoy this session. So we have been trying to reflect the cyber security from various of aspects, from national to international. We've proven that cyberspace, information technology and cybersecurity is a very complex matter, and that cannot be addressed by anyone separately. So today we are living in a very connected world where cyberspace is everywhere, and that means that the policies, the tools, the handling, of course, can be spread across the society in general. So thank you so much for attending this conference. To our speakers from Israel and US, to you, of course, my dear guests here at Bled, and to you, of course, in the audience. And till the next time, stay cyber safe and secure. Thank you.